now, London, Harley Street. A gleaming Rolls-Royce driven by an immaculately uniformed chauffeur glides silently past the consulting rooms of H.R. Camrose, FRCS. Nothing very unusual in this, you might say. London has more Rolls-Royce cars than any capital in the world, and Harley Street more than its fair share of them. But there is something strange about the occupant in the back seat of this car. He is resplendently dressed as a postman. The car turns a corner and stops. The postman gets out, walks quickly round to the main entrance to the consulting rooms, and slips a cream envelope through the letterbox. Then he returns to the car and is driven away. Janice, an attractive receptionist, seeing the envelope on the doormat, picks it up.
H.R. Camrose, FRCS. Oh, what a strange time for the post to arrive. And only one letter. Ah, well.
Episode 1 of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel are handed an assignment which is not to be sneezed at. Ralph Camrose, as he was known to his friends, had the quiet manner of a seasoned surgeon. A large, distinguished man, he was one of the top specialists in the country. His calm authority gave every one of his patients confidence. On this particular occasion, he was examining the nose and throat of quite an old friend, Jules Farage, a well-known tenor.
Open a little wider.
Nothing wrong, huh?
I think you'll live. Yes, looks all clear now.
Are you sure?
Can you afford to pay my fee and question my diagnosis?
I can't afford to lose my voice in the middle of La Traviata.
Don't worry. I'll guarantee your ability to reach the top notes. Now, come in.
A letter for you, Mr. Cameron.
Just put it down there, will you? Now, Jules, I have this prescription for you. There. There you are. Take some of that if there's any signs of reinfection.
Thanks, Ralph. I'm very grateful.
And see that you make good use of your new voice. I'm coming with a small party to the garden on Saturday night.
I shall sing better than I've ever done. Thank you.
Show Senor Farage out, Janice.
Yes, Doctor.
Before he gives us an audition.
Oh, no. You have to pay, and pay the top prices to hear Farage sing. I go.
This way, then?
As the door closed behind them, Ralph Camrose picked up the envelope Janice left on his desk. It had his name and address neatly and correctly typed upon it. Picking up a paper knife, the specialist slit the top of the envelope. There was nothing inside. He held it upside down and shook it. Nothing came out. Camrose stared at the envelope with a puzzled expression, and then was suddenly seized by a most ferocious attack of sneezing. He began to clutch at his collar, gasping for breath. His eyes began to bulge. He tried to stand, panting for air, then slowly toppled forward over his desk, knocking over a table lamp. Janice, hearing the noise, hurried into the reception room, but by the time she reached him, it was too late. H.R. Camrose, FRCS, was dead.
Nothing like a drive in the country, Steed.
Brush away the cobwebs, Mrs. Peel.
Break with the routine.
Commune with nature.
Streaming in the wind.
The trouble is that's not the only thing in the wind.
What else?
Trouble.
Steed, you've been holding back on me.
Oh, well, I told you this was a mystery tour. It's time to solve the mystery.
Well?
We've been summoned to the presence.
Whose?
Mother's.
Why?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, Mrs. Peel, but when Mother says at once, he means...
Sooner than that. Right. Then if Mother's going to put his foot down, you better put yours down. On that accelerator, don't you think, Steed?
mother's rooms in top security were austere to the point of bareness. Everything was on a level with his wheelchair, including 5 different colored telephones. He came straight to the point, holding out a scroll to Steed and motioning to Emma Peel to take a seat.
Well, what do you make of that, Steed? Came off the telex from New York this morning.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what an upset, eh? Los Angeles Rams 24, Green Bay Packers 19.
Not the football results. Halfway down.
Ah. Third ear, nose, and throat specialist dies of unknown causes. Growing concern at the World Clinics. Not our territory, surely, Mother?
It is now. Look at the headline.
Death of Henry Camrose, famous ENT man, expires in consulting room in Harley Street.
Is there a worldwide epidemic, Mother?
A disease that chooses its victims too carefully for my liking. Find the antidote before it spreads. That's your job.
Yes, first of all, find the disease.
Precisely. And it won't be in any medical dictionary.
How can you be sure?
My nose is twitching. Right, that's your job. Get going and let me do mine. Yes? Working on it. Oh, John Steed and Emma Peel. They've been on the case for a full 30 seconds flat. Yes. There should be a breakthrough any minute. Bye. Well, don't just stand there. Get going.
It's never let us down yet.
What?
Mother's nose.
It doesn't seem to have picked up much of a scent.
Ah, well, that's our department. I'll see what I can pick up in Camrose's consulting room.
And what about me as the female species?
Well, you can visit an old friend of mine, name of Padley. He's another of these ear, nose, and throat specialists. Ask him if he knows any common denominator that links the dead men.
Padley?
That's right, in the book. I'll be in Harley Street if you want me. Meet for lunch, right?
Right.
Nothing's been touched?
No, Mr. Steed. I received instructions to leave everything as it was.
Good. Body is slumped here. This envelope was in his right hand, eh? Curious. Stamp has no postmark over it. Nothing inside? No letter?
No.
Wastepaper basket?
There.
No, nothing. Curious shaped envelope. Ordinary paper won't fold up to fit it. Did you happen to see who delivered this?
Well, the postman, I imagine. Although it wasn't the time of a regular delivery. I found it on the doormat.
Special delivery, eh? Right. Recapitulating. Nothing in this room has been removed or destroyed. And Mr. Camrose received this envelope just before his death. Nothing in this room, on this desk, appears to have come from this envelope. And indeed nothing fits it.
Apparently not.
So we're left with one inevitable conclusion.
Well, the envelope was empty when it arrived.
Whoever sent it must have been very absent-minded. I think I'll hold on to this. Thank you, Janice.
Mrs. Peel, meanwhile, had found the address of Mr. Padley. His consulting rooms were the type that were shared with other doctors. The board, just outside the reception, informed her that of Padley, Seaton, and Herrick, Mr. Seaton and Mr. Herrick were out, but Mr. Padley was in.
Mr. Padley won't keep you long, Mrs. Peel. Thank you. Well, if you care to take a seat, their magazine. Thank you.
Mrs. Peel moved idly over to the window and looked down into the busy street. She was just too late to notice a gleaming Rolls-Royce glide up some 100 yards away and park at the curbside. Some minutes later, a postman walked swiftly up the steps to Padley, Seaton, and Herrick and dropped a cream envelope into the letterbox. It was curious that on the way down, he passed another postman going up. The second postman removed his cap and scratched his head in amazement. Then he sorted his mail and pushed it through the letterbox. Mrs. Peel, who'd seen the first cream envelope dropped to the mat, was puzzled to see a second delivery in so short a time. The receptionist, gathering the letters up, started to sort them out. taking the ones for Mr. Padley into his office.
Oh, the post. Thank you, Georgina. Anyone waiting?
Mrs. Peel.
Ah, yes, John Steed's friend, yes. Let me just clear a little of this paperwork. I'll ring you to show her in. Thank you.
Very good, Mr. Padley.
Padley turned to the pile of letters. He started to open a few. They were mostly bills and circulars. Then he noticed a curious cream envelope with no date stamp. He picked up a paper knife and inserted it under the flap. Mrs. Peel and the receptionist, waiting quietly outside, heard a succession of very loud sneezes.
Oh, good gracious, Mr. Padley must have a sudden cold.
Suddenly, the door was flung open. Emma Peel rushed to his aid, but again, too late. Padley died in exactly the same way as Camrose. Mrs. Peel, kneeling beside the body, slowly extracted the cream envelope from his lifeless hand. Now, Mother, John Steed and Emma Peel's boss, had handed them a most curious case. In the United States, 3 top-flight ear, nose, and throat specialists had all died sudden and mysterious deaths. When in London, Ralph Camrose, a Harley Street specialist, also dies of an unknown disease, the coincidence is thought to be too strong. While Steed examined the dead man's consulting rooms, Emma Peel decided to do a little checking up with other well-known physicians. She was waiting to interview Dr. Padley, of Padley, Seaton and Herrick, when there came the sound of violent sneezing from his office. Seconds later, the door was flung open. Padley, clearly suffering from some form of seizure, staggered into the room and collapsed. By the time Mrs. Peel had reached him, Padley was dead. She knelt by the body and took an empty envelope from his lifeless hand. Episode 2 of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel find out more evidence which is not to be sneezed at. Steed and Emma Peel had a date for lunch. It could hardly be thought of as a celebration luncheon. They certainly had nothing to be happy about. Mrs. Peel had brought the news of Padley's death, and Steed could throw no light on the mystery of Ralph Camrose's early demise. All they did have were 2 cream envelopes. They lay together on the tablecloth alongside the gin and tonics.
Snap.
Not quite.
Well, you could have fooled me. They're identical. Just the name and address different. No postmark over the stamp on either of them. Both empty.
Different typewriters.
How can you tell?
Now, this one has its L's misaligned.
You're a disappointment, Steed. I thought we had a clue.
Ah, but we have.
What?
The envelopes themselves. They're identical enough.
Don't tell me. They're made of antique lay, deckle-edged vellum produced from Manitoban rag pulp.
Well, naturally. But I think we ought to have it confirmed by an expert, don't you?
Well, if it'll make you feel better.
It would make me feel better if you'd stick close to Seaton and Herrick. If we lose any more ear, nose, and throat men, Mother will be very cross.
I see. So after lunch, I go back to protecting the medical profession while you go out on a paper chase. Is that right?
Something like that. I don't think I'll have to chase very far. Madewell and Pugh.
I beg your pardon?
High-class manufacturers of discreet notepaper for the aristocracy. By appointment. Cheers.
Cheers, Steve.
Some few hours after that, Steed presented himself at the warehouse of Madewell and Pugh. There was certainly plenty of paper about. Steed wandered around, feeling the texture of some of the sheets. A fuzzy little man in a pince-nez and white coat appeared from behind a counter.
Madewell is the name. Can I help you?
John Steed. I'm just browsing. I'm interested in the papers.
Well, the one you have in your hand. Beautiful, is it not? Just like velvet.
Ah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
That's our twin ply. Very popular with the aristocracy. The Countess Penn never uses anything else.
That's so. Very appropriate. However, being a gentleman so far without a title...
I quite understand, sir. May I suggest as an interim measure a discreet monogram embossed on our unique tissue-lined parchment?
You may indeed.
I thought I detected a man of discernment.
Thank you.
How much may I put you down for, sir? A choir? 2 choirs? A ream?
Oh, at the very least. Tell me something. I hope you won't consider this an insult, but is this one of your lines?
Steed produced one of the envelopes from luncheon.
I regret to say it is, sir. It's really very, very embarrassing. I must confess, our cream wove bond.
Extraordinary. A firm of your reputation.
I know. I'm very well aware of that, sir. I was only saying to Mr. Pugh the other day we ought to discontinue it.
But Mr. Pugh disapproved?
Yes, it's our big moneymaker, you see, sir. Low cost to make bulk buying a more attractive proposition.
So it's fairly common?
In every sense of the word, sir. As a matter of fact, something pretty uncommon happened with this stock about 2 months ago.
Really?
Yes. Someone bought 10,000 of those cream-wove bond envelopes.
And no paper?
How did you guess, sir?
That would be telling. Is it possible for you to tell me more of this strange transaction, Mr. Madewell?
Well, I suppose there can be no harm in it. I have to look it up in the ledger. Would you step this way, Mr.
Steed?
Yes, Steed. Now, where would it be? Yes, this should be it. Yes, here we are, sir. 10,000 cream-wove bond envelopes delivered on the 13th of April to the Anastasia Nursing Academy. For what? The Anastasia Nursing Academy. Thought it a bit odd at the time. What would a nursing academy want with 10,000 envelopes?
The board at the reception of Padley, Seaton and Herrick now read Mr. Seaton in, Mr. Herrick out, and of course Mr. Padley permanently out. Emma Peel had lost no time after lunch. This time she didn't wait in the reception room, but insisted upon seeing Mr. Seaton straight away.
I must confess, Mrs. Peel, that although this is my line of country, I've never come across anything like it before.
No trace of gas or drugs?
No, none.
And yet Mr. Padley seemed to be struggling for breath just before he died.
That's what amazes me. According to what you tell me, he had all the symptoms of acute asphyxiation.
And as his partner, you would know if there was anything wrong with his lungs?
We were not only partners, we were very close friends, Mrs. Peel. We've known each other for years. Why, we were students together. We worked for allergy research together, and if there was anything medically the matter with him, he would certainly have consulted me. The post. Place it down there on the desk, please, Miss Drew.
Yes, Mr. Seaton.
A healthy man apparently chokes to death in a large, airy room. It's unbelievable. Perhaps the autopsy may tell us. Might be a report here in the post.
Just a moment, Doctor.
I beg your pardon, Mrs. Hugh.
It seems there's nothing more deadly than the mail. Excuse me, this may appear rude, but there could be a special envelope. No.
Oh, you people are so melodramatic.
I'm sorry. Tell me, Mr. Seaton, just before Mr. Padley died, I heard the sound of violent sneezing coming from his room. The receptionist heard it too. Remarked on him having caught a sudden cold. It was violent sneezing. What do you make of that?
Well, I really can't see that it can have any relevance to poor Henry's death. It seems to me he suffered some sort of gigantic muscular spasm which cut the air off from his lungs.
Collar too tight?
All his shirts were handmade. He was a meticulous man who never wore anything that didn't fit perfectly. Excuse me. Seaton? Yes. Yes, Lord Nightingale's X-rays. Yes, I'll see to them immediately. Thank you. Will you excuse me, Mrs. Peel? I shan't be very long. It was rather important.
Yes, of course.
Seaton left the office, leaving the door open. Mrs. Peel gazed at the mound of letters on the desk with a sense of disappointment. Out in the street, a Rolls-Royce drew up silently to the curbside. A familiar figure of a postman climbed out and slipped an envelope under the door. It was just very unfortunate that Seaton, having collected his X-rays, was crossing back to his consulting room at exactly that moment. Curious, he bent down, picked up the envelope, and seeing it was addressed to him, began to open it. Emma Peel heard the dreaded sneezing and darted out of the office. One look at Seaton's contorted face and the torn envelope in his hand told her everything she wanted to know. Mrs. Peel rushed to the front door and threw it open wide. The figure of the postman was climbing into the back of the Rolls. The sight was so extraordinary that Mrs. Peel knew this was it. She ran to where her own car was parked, a few yards away.
First time in a long time I've had to tail a Rolls-Royce, but here goes.
The Rolls swung its way quietly out of London, heading for the wooded countryside of Buckinghamshire. Emma Peel, playing all the tricks she could think of to keep inconspicuous and at the same time not lose her quarry, followed a discreet distance behind. In the Rolls, Priest, for that was the postman's name, picked up the speaking tube to talk to his chauffeur.
We seem to have a visitor, Dexter.
So I've observed, sir.
An uninvited guest. I think you can do something about it, Dexter.
I rather think so, sir. There's a crossroads a short way ahead. 5 alternative roads. Should be easy.
Good. I leave it to you.
When Emma Peel arrived at the crossroads some minutes later, there was no sign of the Rolls, and the 5 roads were all empty. Mrs. Peel, exasperated, knew she'd failed. She turned the car and headed back to London. The Rolls, hidden under some trees, remained for a while.
You got the number?
Yes, sir.
Good. I want to find out who she is.
And then deal with her, sir?
Exactly. Carry on, Dexter.
Now, the Anastasia Nurses Academy was an imposing-looking training school, thought John Steed, no expense spared. Yet this was the place that had ordered 10,000 cream-wove bond envelopes from Maidwell and Pew's. So far, Steed's only clue to the mysterious deaths of some of Britain's leading ear, nose, and throat specialists. When Steed called to make a few discreet inquiries, a rather beautiful nurse was hanging up a skeleton.
Aren't you going to introduce us?
His name's McTavish.
What's he doing out of his cupboard?
He lives out here during exams.
Ah, so you can bone up on your facts, eh? Ask the matron if she can spare me a few minutes, will you please, nurse?
Episode 3 of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel, investigating the deaths of the ear, nose, and throat specialists, find the whole affair not to be sneezed at. John Steed saluted McTavish, the student's skeleton, with his umbrella, and followed the shapely form of the nurse, Melanie, down the corridor. He had privately decided that he quite liked women to have a little flesh on their bones. When Matron appeared, Steed wondered if quite so much flesh was necessary.
Ah, there you are, Mr. I'm Matron Alice.
Morning, matron. What have you to say?
No, not at all. I only hope I can be of service. Mr.
Steed,
Ah.
you've heard of my foundation, of
Oh,
course.
I'm afraid not.
No? Oh, what a cloistered life you ministering angels lead. The Steed Foundation is dedicated to the service of the sick.
Oh, I see. Buying your way into heaven, Mr. Steed.
Well, it's the only place left, matron. We are thinking of endowing an establishment of this nature.
Oh, well, this establishment is unique, Mr. Steed. We pride ourselves in setting the highest possible standards.
Oh, I appreciate that, matron. All we can hope to do is to follow lamely in your footsteps.
Well, what is it you want to know?
Why, the secret of your success.
Well, that is simple. We only accept what we consider to be the cream of the nursing profession.
Is there much paperwork involved?
Paperwork?
Well, I'm hopeless at administration. You see, I wondered if I'd be biting off more than I could chew.
The amount of correspondence we have to deal with is, well, nothing out of the ordinary. Letters of acceptance or rejection, mostly rejection. We receive roughly 200 applications per month. 1 or 2 are successful.
Well, I'm sure you're right to be so selective. So it would come to something like 50 letters a week.
Oh, well, something like that.
Well, I don't think that would present too great a problem. I'm most grateful to you, Matron.
Oh, always glad to meet a genuine philanthropist. Only wish there were more like you.
Well, if one's born with a silver spoon in one's mouth, one must see that it feeds as many people as possible. Goodbye, Matron.
Goodbye, Mr. Steed.
Emma Peel was driving at high speed back from the country. It had been a wasteful trip. She'd tried to follow the Rolls-Royce that contained Priest, the postman who'd been delivering those fatal envelopes. But Priest had been on to her, and had in fact completely turned the tables. Mrs. Peel didn't know it, but she was being tailed back to London.
Whatever happens, she mustn't see us, Dexter.
I understand, sir.
It'll be easier as soon as we reach town. There'll be much more of this type of car on the road. They're not easy to tail in a Rose.
I think it's the last thing the young lady expects, sir.
Mrs. Peel reached town in record speed and made for Steed's apartment. Some minutes later, and half a block away, the Rolls glided to a stop.
So, our little bird has come home to roost, Dexter.
It would appear so, sir. Do we pay her nest a visit, sir?
But of course.
One of these?
Dexter, the chauffeur, reached into his pocket and drew out an envelope.
No. I want her alive. Here, I think we'd better use this.
Priest produced a cut-glass scent spray, handling it with extreme care.
We must find out what she knows and who she's working for. This should do the trick.
Up in Steed's apartment, Mrs. Peel looked round, saw that Steed's bowler and umbrella were not on the hall stand, and made for the drinks table, poured a large drink, and picked up the telephone. Priest and Dexter left the car and made their way up to Steed's apartment.
Hello? Institute of Allergic Diseases? May I speak to Dr. Fawcett, please? Yes, I'll hold on.
Dexter and Priest, having checked carefully, have found the right corridor and approached Steed's front door.
This must be it. Over to you, Dexter.
You'll come right over then. Fine, I'll be expecting you. Thank you, Dr. Fawcett. Oh, hey-ho. Yes?
Good day. Market research. We're canvassing for opinions on the new perfume due to appear in the shops next spring. I have the spray here. We call it Oblivion. I think you should fall for it.
But Mrs. Peel sensed all was not well. She noticed the shadowy figure of the postman in the background. She looked at the scent spray in Dexter's hand and the drink in her own. Without hesitation, she threw the drink in his face. As he stumbled into the room, Mrs. Peel chopped him neatly. Priest swung into action, grappling with Mrs. Peel. Dexter struggled to his feet, clutching at the scent spray.
Hold on.
Oh, no, you don't!
All right. I've got her. Help me. Sooner we get her down to the car, the better. Come on.
It was some while after that unpleasant happening that Steed arrived home. He started to remove his keys from his pocket when he noticed that the front door was ajar. He hesitated, prodded the door gently with his umbrella. That someone was waiting inside, he had no doubt. Warily, he pushed the gap wider and entered.
Mrs. Peel?
The man who spoke was a fussy little grey-haired creature. He was sitting primly on a chair in the middle of the room, as though endeavouring to create his own atmosphere of isolation.
Comfortable? No. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Well, I am, frequently.
Choosing curtains like those.
I rather like them.
Too dangerous. 22.3% of all hay fever sufferers are allergic to that type of material.
That's common knowledge, surely.
And look at the dust about the place. Breeding ground for all sorts of bacteria. Where's Mrs. Peel?
I haven't the faintest idea, Mr.
Fawcett. Dr. Fawcett. Institute of Allergic Diseases.
Oh, is that so? I understand, then, that Mrs. Peel asked you to meet her here.
That is so. 4 hours, 31.5 minutes ago.
In connection with Dr. Padley's death?
In connection with the deaths of Dr. Padley and Dr. Seaton.
What?
Dr. Seaton died this morning, soon after the death of his partner.
The same symptoms?
As far as I can ascertain, yes.
Then Emma Peel was certainly onto something. When did you say...
Steed broke off as his foot brushed against something on the carpet. He stopped and picked up the scent spray.
Odd.
Very odd.
A scent spray in the middle of my carpet. What do we deduce from this, Doctor?
That Mrs. Peel was here before I arrived. She probably phoned me from this very apartment.
True. Smell this.
Hey, steady, steady.
Well?
Chloroform.
I don't like it.
You're not the only one. If chloroform is exposed to light and air, it oxidizes to generate phosgene, which...
Dr. Fawcett, would you think me inhospitable if I suggested we postpone our little chat?
Not at all. What's another 4 hours to a busy man?
Well, it's just that I'm due for a rather unpleasant interview. Already, I can hear a voice saying...
Lost her? Lost Emma Peel? What on earth do you mean, Steed?
Well, she's disappeared, Mother.
Dirty work?
Smells. Here, the spray, a trifle unhygienic, too.
Inordinately careless. Scotch?
Oh, please.
Anything positively gone?
Not much.
Our time's getting short. 4 more ear, nose, and throat men dead in the last 6 hours. 1 in Brazil, 1 in Australia, and 2 in Russia. Soda?
A dash.
What's the next move?
Find the answer to the puzzle.
What sort of puzzle?
Why a nurses' training college would order 10,000 envelopes.
Sounds like a road to nowhere.
Maybe, but it's got to be traveled, though.
Need any help?
No, thank you. One-man job. Mine.
When?
This evening.
And so, later, John Steed journeyed again to the Anastasia Nurses' Academy. Outside the main doors, he read the motto, 3 C's.
3 C's. Competence, comfort, compassion. And no difficult locks, I trust.
There weren't. Steed entered silently. He found Matron's office without trouble. Then he heard an unusual noise. Unusual anyway for that time of night. Steed tiptoed to another door and opened it. To his amazement, Steed found himself gazing at a long line of typists, all typing away at envelopes, throwing them into growing piles in their delivery baskets. Steed closed the door.
3 C's. Curiouser, and curiouser, and curiouser.
Now, John Steed was sure the answer to the case could only be found by following up on the clue of the empty envelopes. This had taken him, later that day, to the training college of the Anastasia Nurses' Academy. Steed had managed to get into the building all right. He started his investigations from the matron's office, and it was there that he'd heard the strange sound of typing.
Shorthand typing at a nurse's training college? And in the evening?
Steed opened another door and found himself staring at rows of girls typing furiously. They were addressing envelopes and throwing them into delivery baskets. Steed closed the door.
Curiouser and curiouser. Yes, like Alice in Wonderland. I wonder what matron Alice can tell us.
Episode 4 of this story, in which John Steed, still unable to find Mrs. Peel and baffled by the evidence to hand, nevertheless believes a few fresh clues are not to be sneezed at. John Steed, placing his umbrella and bowler on the hat stand in Matron's office, slipped on a special pair of gloves. He decided to risk turning on the light on the desk and started to make a thorough search of the room.
Telephone directories. Hundreds of them. New York, Barcelona, San Francisco, Adelaide. All over the world. Files. Correspondence to be answered. Strange, there's nothing medical. And what's this? From Colonel Morris Timothy, retired. Walsingham House. Dear Matron Alice, glad to know our plans are going ahead without a hitch. Keep up the good work. Victory, final victory. That is the aim, and it lies just ahead. Sincerely, Morris Timothy. Colonel retired. Colonel Morris Timothy. Now, I've heard that name somewhere before. And still not a clue about Mrs. Peel. Where the devil has she got herself to?
Mrs. Peel, at that moment, was asking herself very much the same question. She knew she was in some sort of cell. It contained a bed on which she was lying, feeling rather sick. There were also several sacks leaning against the walls. As Emma Peel sat up, holding her head, the heavy door was unlocked and swung open. The man called Priest entered.
So, you've come round. Got a tiny headache, have we?
Oh, no. We're just a tiny bit homesick.
Tell me a little more about home. Where is it, and who are you working for?
I'm not working for anyone.
Come now, you must see that we mean business. There are ways.
I can't.
Now, that won't do any good.
No, but this might.
Mrs. Peel was really doing quite well, but unfortunately Dexter appeared in the door of the cell. He held two items. In his left hand, a straitjacket. In his right, a rather ugly cosh.
Thank you, Dexter. Yes, if you want to play games, little lady, then we must give you a copy of the rules. A straitjacket, Dexter, and then find Matron. She has work to do. This girl has got to be made to talk.
John Steed, meanwhile, had gone for a drive. Mother wasn't too pleased to see him. It was getting late, and there was still other work to be done.
Well, what is it this time, Steed?
What have we got on Timothy?
Oh, Steed.
Yes, Mother?
How long have you been in the department?
Oh, I don't know, quite a few years, I suppose.
Then you must know by now that we don't file personnel under their Christian names.
This is a surname. Colonel Morris Timothy, retired, of Walsingham House.
He's clean.
You sure?
It's my job to be sure. Morris Timothy, Indian Army, served in 2 wars, the 2 world wars, that is. Not just frontier stuff. Wealthy, something of a philanthropist, a bit kinky. Endows various worthy causes, including...
Including the Anastasia Academy?
Yes.
I think I'd better pay Colonel Timothy a visit.
Any news of Mrs. Peel?
Not yet.
I'm worried. But you know what they say. No news is good news.
Yes. Good night, Mother.
Walsingham House, residence of Colonel Timothy, retired, was large, old, and rambling. The sort of house that could have been converted into a private nursing home. Steed rang the bell, and receiving no answer, tried the door. To his surprise, it opened. The hall, marble-floored and richly panelled, was furnished with antiques. 3 large crates struck an incongruous note. Steed lifted the top of one of them with his umbrella.
Full of handkerchiefs. And the next? Paper tissues.
Curiosity, sir, was responsible for the demise of the cat.
Not to worry, I have 8 lives left.
My advice would be not to throw them away too easily.
But cats don't listen to advice. They walk alone.
That's why so many of them get lost, sir. Have the goodness to remove your coat and roll up your shirt sleeves.
What? Fisticuffs?
Antibiotic injection. Colonel's orders. No visitor allowed in without it. You are a visitor?
A Steed. Now, I phoned. Perhaps I should have also brought my health certificate.
Wouldn't have been of any use, sir. The Colonel insists on his own form of protection.
Against what?
Other people's germs. You see, he has enough of his own to contend with.
Infection prone, eh?
Ever since he came back from Malaya, no resistance to Western bacteria. This won't hurt, sir. Now.
You handled that like a connoisseur.
Practice makes perfect. Colonel Timothy will see you now. This way, Mr. Steed. Mr. Steed, sir.
Come in, Steed, come in. You know that the only creatures who get colds are human beings and chimpanzees?
Amazing.
Excuse me, kettle's boiling. Got to have me inhalation, you know.
Can I assist?
Better not get too near. Pour the boiling water into that bowl, there's a good fellow.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, thank you. Now the crystals. That's better. Towel over the head. Only take a minute. You know, there's a lesson to be learned from all this.
I beg your pardon?
A lesson to be learned from the chimpanzees.
Oh, safer to walk on all fours.
No. The more civilized you are, the more susceptible.
Disease of the sophisticated.
Got it in one.
It's yes?
Oh, it's so good. Ever thought of going to Malaya?
Well,
Don't. Dreadful place. Have a look at that.
Early Etruscan.
Not the container. It's what it's got inside. Common cold virus. Preserved at minus 16 degrees centigrade in dry ice.
That's so. Should I have known?
What was it you wanted to speak to me about?
My card.
Steed Foundation. Never heard of it.
Well, it's nothing to be ashamed of. I assume that you've never had a serious illness in Mozambique.
You must be clairvoyant.
We've endowed 3 hospitals there. Now we're founding a nurses' training college to staff them. And as you have helped endow the Anastasia Academy...
You want my advice?
Please.
My advice is don't. More trouble than they're worth.
But the Anastasia Academy...
Never go near a place. Boring, excruciatingly boring. Now, if you want to see really something interesting, let me show you over the rest of the place.
Bless you.
What? Yes. Well, this way.
The Colonel led the way from the room down some steps, and pushing open steel doors, revealed that the rest of the house was a form of nursing home.
3 C's. Do they stand for competence, comfort, and compassion?
What? No. That's the other dreary place we were talking about. Cold Cure Clinic. Yes, my pet project. Decided if the medical profession couldn't cure my cold, then I'd do it myself. Oh, Yes, not much luck so far. Well, like to look around.
Well, there's nothing I should like better.
These things take time, you know. Glover!
Coming.
No. Dr. Glover, my chief of research. Frank, this is Mr. Steed of the Steed Foundation.
Good evening. Sounds impressive, Mr. Steed. Oh, only if one comes from Mozambique.
Steed branching out. Thought we might put him in the picture. Show him the shop window, as it were.
Oh, a prospective helper. Oh, good. This way, Mr. Steed.
Tell me, what are all these small rooms leading off the corridors for?
Guinea pig quarters. Student volunteers. We give them artificially induced colds and then house them in pairs so that we can compare their reactions.
How are the colds induced?
Well, first we give them a session in the deep freeze room. Perhaps you'd like to see it. This way.
Good evening, Doctor.
Evening, nurse, evening. Yes.
Steed didn't react, but he did notice that the badge on the nurse's uniform read Anastasia Academy. Now, on the bed, in a dimly lit cell, Emma Peel struggled feebly. She'd made one unsuccessful attempt to escape by tackling the man Priest when he came to try to extract information from her. Unfortunately, he'd been helped by Dexter, who turned out to be quite an expert with a kosh. Mrs. Peel now had a large bump on the temple and a headache. She was further restricted by a gag and a straitjacket. She'd seldom been more helped. Mrs. Peel fell off the bed. She staggered to her feet, lost her balance, and fell heavily against one of the many sacks that were propped against the wall. The sack tore open, fell sideways, and started scattering the contents on the floor of the cell. Hundreds of envelopes, all typed out, ready for posting, all exactly the same as those used to cause the deaths of every ear, nose, and throat specialist. Emma Peel passed out. Episode 5 of this story, in which John Steed, although infected with enthusiasm, realizes that he is still out in the cold and wonders if his efforts are really not to be sneezed at. John Steed, visiting Colonel Modest Timothy, retired, had found him in the grip of a most vicious cold. Steed gathered that this was more or less the Colonel's permanent, unhappy state, and that as a result of this, the retired army man had decided to devote the rest of his natural days to finding a cure. Steed, privately, thought it would be a long job, but he agreed to be shown over the Colonel's cold cure clinic, which was attached to the house.
Well, this way. I'm sure you'd like to see our deep freeze room where we induce colds for curing.
Yes.
This way. Evening, nurse.
Evening, Dr. Glover. Evening, Colonel.
Evening.
Steed did not react, but he did note that the badge on the nurse's uniform read Anastasia Academy. The first nurse had also had that uniform.
That's true.
What's that?
I said, two.
Bless you.
This way, Mr. Steed.
Bit austere, isn't it?
Everything must be ultra-sanitary and 100% hygienic.
Quite. Tell me, these guinea pigs, the students who volunteer, do they do this for fun?
Science.
They get free board and expenses.
Oh, this is the room. It's kept just below freezing point. Prolonged exposure to such a temperature usually induces a cold within 48 hours. Would you care to look through the grill?
That would certainly shiver my timbers.
Oh, I don't think it does any permanent harm.
What happens when they've caught the cold bug?
Then we isolate the virus and inoculate the patients with experimental antidotes. Come and see our allergy room.
Oh, thank you.
Everything to your satisfaction, Doctor?
Oh, yes. Yes, thank you, nurse.
I see that you employ Anastasia nurses.
Yes, all part of the helpful organization. Glover here insists on it. You train them, we'll use them.
And they are only the best. Matron Alice sees to that.
What's she now?
In here next. 75% of the population have at least one cold a year. 25% have 4 or more. The loss of working hours is staggering.
The mind boggles.
Quite.
So this laboratory is where we experiment on antidotes for allergic diseases.
And we're after complete victory. Yes, no good chasing the enemy into the footholds where they can regroup. Search and destroy while they're still out on a raiding party. That's the ticket.
Fight them in the veins and in the arteries.
In the cells and in the membranes.
In the handkerchiefs.
And in the paper tissues. The biggest mistake they made was to invade me. I intend to fight back with every weapon at my disposal. Yes, every weapon.
Out in the night, speeding its way towards the heart of the city, was a Rolls Royce. Priest, in the back seat, reached for the speaking tube. With the other hand, he held an envelope.
Dexter, you may as well know our destination. The same as before, Doctors Padley, Seaton, and Herrick. This time it's for Dr. Herrick. Do hurry, Dexter. We don't want the doctor to be too late to collect a special delivery.
John Steed completed his tour of the clinic.
Well, thank you, Dr. Glover. Most interesting.
Well, I hope you'll decide to join us, Mr. Steed. The more the merrier.
Carry on the good work, Glover. Remember our aim, unconditional surrender. This way, Steed. A long campaign, Steed. Long campaign.
And, of course, you're running short of allies.
What's that?
Cameras, Padley, Seaton, all dead. Did you know them?
I wrote to them several times. Never had a reply. Like a drink, Scott?
Oh, thank you.
As Colonel Timothy, retired, turned to the drinks cabinet, Steed sneaked a quick look down at the open appointment book on the desk. What he saw gave him quite a start, for there, in the Colonel's precise hand, was written, Contact Herrick.
I suppose they thought themselves above this sort of thing. Perhaps they thought, as specialists, they were too good. Too brilliant to work on something as common as the common cold. Your drink.
Oh, thank you, Colonel. But I don't think I'll stay for it after all. Thank you again. See you.
Oh, really, Steve, but you haven't...
And under cover of this last outburst, Steed left. He made for the nearest phone box on the London road. In the London consulting rooms of Padley, Seaton, and Herrick, old Dr. Herrick was working late. He sighed, stretched himself.
Sufficient to the day. Oh, no more calls. Sufficient to the day.
Downstairs in the parked Rolls, Priest gave his instructions.
The delivery doesn't take place to the rooms, Dexter. That's Herrick's car, the large black one standing over there by the entrance to the park. Leave the envelope propped up against the inside of the windscreen. Then come back here and wait.
John Steed, having given up hope of reaching Herrick by phone, ran back to his Bentley, climbed in, and drove as fast as he could towards town. While in the road, Priest waited patiently. It had its reward. Eventually, old Mr. Herrick left his rooms, doddered his way down the steps and over to his car.
There he goes. Won't be long now, Dexter.
Herrick's car was an automatic. He got in, started the engine, slipped the car into gear, and was about to drive off when he noticed the envelope propped up on the inside of the windscreen. Herrick frowned, took the envelope, ripped it open. The effect was immediate. He firstly sneezed. His foot slipped as he was thrown forward and hit the accelerator pedal. The car shot forward at great speed, rapidly climbed the grass verge. At the entrance to the park gate stood a large tree. Herrick's car hit it a glancing blow. The door flew open, and with one last enormous sneeze, Herrick pitched out. As the rolls purred by the crash, Steed arrived. He stopped outside Padley, Seaton and Herrick, and then saw Herrick's crashed car. He hurried over. A glance told him that Herrick was dead. Another glance showed him the envelope, clutched in the old man's hand. In the allergy room of the cold cure clinic, another envelope was being held, this time by a pair of rubber gloves worn by Matron Alice.
Just your mask. Now, the nozzle into the envelope and just seal it. So. And now, this is a special delivery. Note the name, personal and private. John Steed, Esquire. Urgent. This must go at once, while I go and attend to that little pet nuisance of ours. I rather fancy she needs cooling off.
There was only one person John Steed could talk to, a person just as worried about the case as he was, Mother.
Things are going out of control, Steed. I told you when I assigned the case that it was urgent. Now, every day brings in more reports of specialists dying. Now, why do you think I sent for you in the first place?
I'm beginning to have my doubts, Mother.
Your job is to stop the smear in the medical profession.
I wish we could find Mrs. Peel.
How far have you got now?
4 envelopes.
Well, that's an improvement. Last time it was 10,000. What have they got to do with it?
I wish I knew. One was found near every dead man.
Well, it's no use running to Mother all the time. Find out anything at Timothy's place.
No, not really.
Well, I'm not surprised.
I am.
Why?
Too many arrows point in that direction.
Laws of coincidence broken too often.
That's right. Emma Peel was onto something before she disappeared.
How do you know?
Because she sent for Dr. Fawcett of the Institute of Allergic Diseases.
Had a chat with him?
A short one. May I use your phone?
Help yourself. Not that one. Unless you can speak fluent Swahili.
Well, as a matter of fact, I do. However... I think you're sickening.
What?
For a cold, Mother. For a cold.
Now, a light clicked on in Emma Peel's cell. She blinked furiously, trying to readjust her vision. Hands seized her, and the straitjacket was mercifully removed. The matron peered down at her.
Now, if you decide to cooperate like a good girl, you won't be hurt. First, we'll remove the gag. Now, a few questions. Will you answer truthfully?
Yes.
You promise, not lip service now.
Yes. Not lip service. Teeth.
Emma Peel's bite was always worse than her bark. Episode 6 of this story, in which Colonel Maurice Timothy, retired, realizes that John Steed's contribution to the cold cure clinic is not to be sneezed at. John Steed returned to his apartment later that night. The day had been a long one. Steed had an idea the night was going to be even longer. He telephoned Fawcett of the Institute of Allergic Diseases and was expecting him round. Perhaps it was a combination of the fact that he didn't put the light on and he was rather thoughtful that caused him to step right over an envelope lying on his doormat.
Well, first things first, a large drink.
Steed sipped his drink reflectively and began to pace to and fro. On the third perambulation, something white caught his eye. He bent down, picked up the envelope, and studied it.
Personal and private. John Steed, Esquire. Urgent. Ah, good news. They're on to me. And that can only mean one thing. At least I'm on the right track.
Emma Peel had not found recent events very encouraging. It seemed the matron rather resented being bitten in her podgy forearm and was determined that Mrs. Peel should be cooled off.
A period in the deep freeze should cool your temper, my girl. All right, put her in there. And now the temperature gauge. Let's set it to sub-zero. That should do the trick.
When Fawcett of the Institute of Allergic Diseases arrived at Steed's apartment, he wasn't in a very good mood. Never a cheerful man, he found being called out at night extremely irritating. He was quite prepared to give John Steed a piece of his mind. He rang the bell. But when the door opened, he recoiled in horror.
That's all, boy. Not outer space, just a gas mask. Necessary for a little experiment. Go ahead.
What are you playing at, Steed, inviting me round here so late?
I'll soon explain. Here, put this other mask on and come through.
Oh, very well.
There. Come through.
Yes, it's all right.
Right now, come and watch this. Now, you see, I've received an envelope. Now, I have got reason to think it contains something rather deadly. So I slit the envelope. So... and took the contents all over Mrs. Peel's treasured pot plant. Oh, dear. She's not going to thank me for that at all.
The pot plant was positively wilting.
What the devil's this all about, Steed? My dear Fawcett, that's why I've invited you here. I want you to tell me. Let's leave the rest of the thing for a bit. Let me give you a drink. Oh, it's a bit difficult through the mask, eh? Oh, never mind, won't take long. I'm sure it'll clear soon. It's a question of temperature in my belief. Do sit down.
It was a question of temperature that was bothering Mrs. Peel. The freezing chamber was, well, freezing. She tried jumping up and down, and then running round in circles. Poor Emma found that her exertions were wearing her out without making her warm, and she was quickly succumbing to the intense cold.
Oh, for a drink. A nice hot drink.
Your drink, Fawcett. I think we can remove our masks now. Well, that seems to be safe enough. Now, the envelope. Anything left in there, do you think, Fawcett?
There's enough. Oh, it's not dangerous now. It might be infective, but it's not lethal. Microscope, Steed.
At your elbow. Slides on the desk.
Let's take a smear. Now, let's see.
Anything left? Anything interesting?
Enough. Have to have it analyzed, of course, but my guess is that it's a common cold virus powder, manufactured at a fantastic concentration.
Virus powder?
It sounds innocuous enough, but it'd be powerful enough to kill an elephant.
So the victim would sneeze to death?
If he didn't choke to death first.
Well, how do you isolate a common virus?
By a dry freeze, or rather a freeze-drying process. But how it is concentrated to this extent is beyond me.
Death by post, eh? So simple.
So effective. An unsuspecting victim would stand no chance.
But why ear, nose, and throat specialists? Camrose, Padley, Seaton, Herrick? What on earth do they have in common?
Well, the tragedy is that if they'd realized what it was in each envelope, they would each have known how to deal with it.
Why?
Because they were all working in the same field.
What field?
Anti-allergy research.
You mean common cold allergies?
Yes, that's right.
What I can't understand is why you haven't received one of these envelopes yourself.
Probably because I'm only concerned with virus analysis.
Whereas the dead man...
We're concerned with antidotes. Any one of them might have discovered one already, for all I know.
So, if they'd lived, they would have been a constant threat to someone who has the facilities to produce this powder. Excuse me, Fawcett, it's late, I know, but I have to see a certain gentleman, late retired.
In the deep freeze room, Emma Peel had faced up to the fact that it just wasn't worth trying to keep warm by burning up energy. She looked around the place.
Ooh. Oh, there's no way out, except that small grating. What size hips, I wonder? Well, I have been slimming lately. But how? It has possibilities. And I can never move it. Nothing here even to attempt it with. Nothing but silly tablets and medicines and... Now, what is this?
Mrs. Peel stopped by a shelf of bottles. Prominent amongst the other packets of drugs was a packet labelled potassium chlorate tablets. Next to the packet was a bottle labelled ether. Mrs. Peel stared at them for some time.
That gives me an idea. Potassium tablets.
She reached up, took the packet, and began sprinkling a trail of tablets from the grating, which was almost at floor level, to the opposite side of the cell. She removed one shoe and began carefully grinding the tablets into a powder.
Potassium chloride explodes under impact. So careful. Ether is inflammable. Well, mix the two and hit out, and something's got to happen. Well, the grating's out, and so am I.
Mrs. Peel squeezed her lissom body into the opening and found herself in an air shaft. It was a little draughty, but the temperature was near to normal. As she began crawling on all fours along the tunnel, she heard voices.
Well, Steed should be out of the way by now.
Seaton certainly is.
There was one point when I thought the case was getting out of control. I was actually thinking of calling in the chief, but he wouldn't have liked it.
It's all right, matron. There were no delivery complications. Steed will have found the letter by now, opened it, sniffed, and snuffed it. So what's next?
A final allergy test. And then we can start to eliminate the rest of the opposition.
What kind of test?
Oh, a very final one. We need a special guinea pig.
It was at that point that Emma Peel, in the air shaft above the heads of the matron and priest, could go on no longer. She held her nose as hard as she could.
What's the survival risk?
Nil.
And how about using...
Mrs. Peel sneezed, lost her grip and shot down the air shaft, arriving with a clump and a sneeze at their feet.
How about using her?
Ideal. Take her to the allergy laboratory. The chief can deal with her immediately.
John Steed had knocked up a gentleman who'd just retired. Retired for the night, that is, as well as retired from the army. Colonel Maurice Timothy, late, we've gone into all that, was not at all pleased. He'd met Steed with a shotgun at the ready. Steed had done some swift talking, but...
It's preposterous, ridiculous. Murder by mail, deadly dust. Even if it were true.
I think you know it is true, Colonel.
You mean you suspect me?
The colonel raised the shotgun.
I don't know why you bother to deny it. You have all the cards.
I don't believe in playing them. Not in the habit of shooting people in cold blood.
Colonel, if you hadn't got anything to do with this, then don't you see that you yourself would have got one of these envelopes before now?
Well, now, bless my soul. I never opened my mail until morning, but look at this. On the tray ready with my breakfast things.
That's it. Colonel Maurice Timothy, retired. Most urgent. Now do you believe me?
Now, Mrs. Peel had escaped from the deep freeze room at the cold cure clinic by removing the grating that led to the air shaft and crawling her way along the tunnel that led to the other rooms. Unfortunately, just above the shaft that led down to the matron's office, she was overcome with an irresistible desire to sneeze. She tried to prevent this by holding her nose, lost her grip on the metal support, and shot down the opening into the room beneath.
Right. I've got her. Here's the special guinea pig we need.
My deal. Take her to the allergy laboratory. The chief can deal with her immediately.
Episode 7 of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel solve their case and agree that despite the inconvenience, their partnership is not to be sneezed at. Colonel Maurice Timothy, retired, stood looking down at the breakfast tray, all set out for serving the following morning. On the tray, propped against a china milk jug, was an envelope. It was addressed to him. John Steed moved forward swiftly and picked it up.
Now, do you believe me, Colonel?
Death through the mail? You mean that envelope contained... Oh, it's preposterous.
You care to open it, Colonel?
You mean someone is trying to...
I do. Fawcett of the Institute of Allergic Diseases has had a smear of the virus under a microscope. He swears it's lethal. I'd like to try it.
I say, someone actually trying it out on me, what?
Exactly, Colonel.
What do we do, Steed?
We have to find that someone very quickly.
And where do you suggest we look?
Right here, or rather in the extension of your house.
What? You mean in my cold cure clinic?
Right.
But that means I've been nurturing a viper in me bosom.
I'm afraid so. One whose sting is still very deadly.
Gracious, I hardly know what to say, Steed.
Exactly. Going to open up for me, Colonel?
I'll do better than that. I'll come along with you. Nothing like the call to arms to bring the color to the cheeks. What's the plan of campaign?
Frontal assault. Straight down the corridor. Now, where's my umbrella? Bowler? That's it. Shoulder arms.
I have a tin helmet somewhere. Shotgun. Steady the bumps. By the left, Steed. March. What are we looking for, by the way?
A tall, attractive brunette.
Who isn't?
Now, this one's married. Name of Mrs. Emma Peel. That is, if we're not too late.
Mrs. Peel was in the allergy room and rather in need of help. She was suspended by one hand from a beam, her feet barely touching the floor. The rope around her wrists was so tight that she was forced to use her hand to clutch the beam. Her other arm, which was bare, was tied to her side. Mrs. Peel wasn't very happy with the arrangement.
Won't be long now, mate.
No, it's a shame to keep her waiting. Now she's ready. Yes. Chief. Everything prepared.
Oh, splendid. We'll start with the usual standard tests, find out her resistance. Priest, check with Dexter and see we're not disturbed.
Very well, Dr. Glover.
You wish me to prepare the injection, Chief?
You wouldn't be allergic to caviar and champagne, Mrs. Peel.
Try me.
Oysters?
Love them.
Quail? Any form of poultry or seafood?
No. Are you allergic to anything at all, Mrs. Peel?
Yes.
Oh, what?
Fat matrons.
Let me prepare just a small injection, Chief.
Very well, matron. Go ahead.
John Steed and the Colonel had broken formation when they entered the main body of the cold cure clinic. In fact, in the darkness of the corridors, they adopted trench warfare and moved forward in a crouched position. The Colonel had the shotgun at the ready. Steed held his umbrella like a medieval lance.
No one in sight.
Combined operation elsewhere?
Indubitably. But where? Shh. Halt.
What?
There. By the door.
Sentry door. What? I have a plan. I shall...
Whatever the Colonel's plan was, it was lost in the confusion of his sneeze. The man at the door, Dexter, sprang to his feet and whirled towards them. The Colonel caught him on the face with his tin helmet.
No!
Steed administered the coup de grace with a bop of his bowler.
I tell Alamine all over again.
Surprise attack.
Pincer movement.
The fluidity of approach.
And your hands above your head.
Hands above...
High above your head.
Thank you. Shotgun down, Colonel. Prisoners of war, it seems.
Sorry, we don't take prisoners.
Remember the Battle of Vimy, Colonel? Nice strategy, eh?
Copybook.
Remember how it all began? A diversionary attack?
One to the left and one to the right.
Right!
Army issue.
And demobbed with...
Steed and the Colonel had again used the tin helmet bowler technique to advantage. Priest was out for the count.
Out cold. This way.
She is allergic to ragweed, Dr. Glover.
Oh, perfect. A rather plebeian allergy, Mrs. Peel, but perfect for our purpose.
Which is?
The test of my serum. A test to destruction.
But if I'm to be destroyed, you may as well tell me why. Why are you killing off all those men?
The oldest motive, the oldest cliché. They knew too much. I've discovered an allergy to which no one is resistant yet. Swab the arm, ready for injection, matron.
Oh, very good, Doctor. But soon one of your colleagues might have discovered an antidote.
Precisely. Now, a little whiff of my dust can destroy an entire population. Our whole country. And there'll be no defense against it.
Weapons sold to the highest bidder. Is that it?
A few grains of my powder will make me rich, Mrs. Peel. A few grains of powder or a few milligrams of my liquid. Hold her steady, matron.
Kick out, Mrs. Peel, and look out for Glover.
Stay where you are. All of you. Stay still. You see this vial? There's enough liquid in here to kill the whole clinic. Still. That's better. Now I'm leaving you. Bye.
I'm glad to see you haven't lost your grip, Mrs. Peel. Help her down, Colonel. I hate to see a woman hanging around aimlessly.
Colonel Timothy.
Hat trick, Steed.
All yours, Colonel. Oh, very ungraceful. I'm going after Glover.
Glover had taken the back way out, and that meant using the iron fire escape. Steed anticipated this and hurried to the floor above. As Glover began the descent, Steed called to him.
Glover, up here.
I warned you, Steed.
I know, but I've never been able to follow doctor's orders. Besides, you've forgotten something.
Steed reached into his pocket and withdrew the envelope addressed to the Colonel.
You forgot your mail.
Steed slipped the envelope quickly and held it upside down and let it float down upon Glover. The effect was instantaneous, but hardly surprising.
More hot water in this foot bath for me, Steed.
I'll do better than that. Here. Auntie Ermintrude's patent cold cure. Oh, it'll have you up and about in no time. Drink it up.
You're not joining me?
Well, it's a bit heady for the time of day. Go ahead. It clears all the sinuses.
Not bad. Very kind of your aunt. I should write and thank her.
I'm afraid that won't be possible.
Oh?
Poor Auntie Ermintrude died at an early age.
Oh, dear. What did she die of?
She caught cold, actually. Well, anyway, one good thing about this, I didn't catch cold. Bad for the image. I mean, you and I both with colds at the same time. You see what I mean?
People might talk.
Yes, draw the wrong conclusion.
Steed, you'd better face it. You're hopelessly compromised. This footbath is big enough for 4 feet, Steed.
Move over, Mrs. Peel.
The Avengers. Listen every evening, Monday to Friday, to John Steed and Emma Peel, The Avengers.